Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Shadows and Ink podcast. And today, my guest is Jes Hart Stone, and we're going to be talking about the psychology of horror and manifested trauma. So I'm going to turn it over to her and let her introduce herself. Take it away.
Hi, good morning, Anita. Yes, I'm Jes Hart Stone. I'm delighted to be here at the House of Shadows and Ink and Anita. And let's see, I write dark psychological suspense, mostly featuring strong, powerful, but deeply flawed women. And I love that genre.
Yeah, it's a great genre. So today, as I said, we're discussing the psychology of horror and trauma. So, what would you consider the essential elements of a psychological horror book?
Okay. Well, I've thought about the different genres that go under this big umbrella. So you have thriller, suspense, psychological, suspense, horror, dark erotica. They all kind of go under that umbrella. But what they have in common is that their characters are driven by the emotions of fear, tension, and paranoia in many cases. So, if you explore the literature and the tropes in these of these genres, you're going to find out that there are several overlapping tropes. One is psychological trauma, a menacing environment, danger and tension, and quite frequently an unreliable narrator. So that's somebody who um, they think they're perfectly fine, and deep down inside, they're just plain nuts. So those things, I think those elements, if you can combine those elements in your story, you're going to have a real dark thriller.
So, do you find a difference writing an unreliable narrator as opposed to the more reliable narrator?
I think they're more fun. I do think they're more fun. Yeah, they have deep secrets. They lie to themselves. I really like that when a narrator is lying to themselves. So they're not only lying to you, the writer, they're lying to the readers, and they're lying to themselves. And so you've got to like ferret around in there and find out what's going on. So I think they're more fun.
Yeah. So, what kind of a information distribution do you have to give so that the readers don't feel cheated? That's the trick, I think, of writing an unreliable narrator, because you're essentially lying to the narrator's lying to themselves, but in a lot of cases, you're lying to the reader too. So
Mhm.
how do you balance that lying to the reader with giving them enough information so it doesn't feel like you've cheated them?
Exactly. You know, you don't want to dump the character, the narrator's background onto the reader. You don't want to try to evoke, oh, this is why this person's like this. You don't want to give away their secret. But I think sprinkling little bits of this character's background in enough so there are little clues, or some people like to call them Easter eggs. If you sprinkle that in so the reader can go, oh, she did tell us about that early on. I think that keeps the reader from feeling cheated, then they can go, oh yeah, if I'd seen that earlier, yeah, she did tell us that. And I actually learned that trick from Joe, the publisher of Crystal Lake. He said, you're going to have to give this unreliable narrator, you're going to have to give some clues really early on in the book so the reader can follow along. I think that's how you keep the reader from feeling cheated.
Yeah, so essentially you're giving them what seems like throwaway information, but it isn't really. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that's a
And
good
then when
tip.
they put it together, they go, "Oh yeah." Either I was smart enough to put it together, or why didn't I see that? You know.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great technique. So generally, you see fictional characters with existing trauma, or authors inflicting external trauma on their poor characters, or a combination of the two. So, what's your process for creating the emotional and mental consequences that come with traumatizing your characters?
Well, traumatizing our characters is pretty much the name of the game, right? I mean, that's what we're doing here. And Nabokov, I think, said it so well. He said, our job is to get our characters up a tree and then throw rocks at them. And I think that he's absolutely right on that. And my process, what I like to do is get the character to this emotional cliff and then either push them off the cliff or get them to think that I'm going to push them off the cliff. And that builds that tension, and it's quite fun.
Yeah. Yes. Our poor characters are made to suffer.
It's their job.
Yeah. Okay, so how would you approach using an emotional or mental trigger as a plot point or handle a scene where a character has a mental breakdown?
Okay, I'm thinking of my current book. It was just released last month by Crystal Lakes, called Then We'll Be Safe. And the two major characters in this story, each of them have breakdown moments. I mean, where they just go, I can't go on. There's no reason to live. And those become plot points. But if I didn't get them out of those breakdown moments, then we may as well just end the book, right? We're dead in the water. So what I do to get them out of that, and what they get each other out, is that the other character has a real big problem. And so the character who's experiencing the breakdown has to get herself out, pull herself up, and go help the other person. And I think it's really important for writers to get their characters up that tree or put them in a puddle, but give them the wherewithal to get down from that tree or to paddle out of that puddle. Because if you don't, as I said, you're just going to be stuck in the water.
Yeah,
So,
or stuck up the tree.
or stuck up the tree. Yeah, you really do want to give your characters some way to get out of that, even if it means to make a very poor decision, which is going to get them up yet another tree.
Yeah, but I would add, just make sure that the way you devise to get them out of the tree, or the poor decision that gets them in the other tree, is believable, because you don't want to go the route, well, she just pulled a rabbit out of her hat, right?
No, 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 no. You don't want to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's got
then
to be believable, even if it's a horror story set with all, monsters and Blue Lagoon creatures and all that. You still have to make it believable.
yeah, it has to be believable for the character too. And I think that's the point some authors don't get or miss, is that having something believable is one thing, but it has to be believable in the context of the character and their personality as well.
Their worldview. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would your advice be for using a setting to enhance the tension you need for a good psychological horror book?
Oh, that's great. Well, setting is so important. And along with, so you want to put the character into a place that's scary from initially. You don't want to put them in a mall, although malls can be pretty scary actually. But okay, you put them in a haunted house, you put them in a forest, you put them someplace, try to isolate them as much as you can, because when we're alone, we're even more afraid. And then I love using weather, because Mother Nature's completely neutral. She doesn't care if you're scared, traumatized, wounded, hungry, whatever. She doesn't care. She's going to do what she does. And you can use weather to as a metaphor for what's going on inside of the character. It can be a gloomy day, it can be a bright, sunny, happy day. You can use weather and setting to mirror what's going on in the story and inside the character. So I think setting is incredibly important, especially in dark fiction.
Definitely. I would like to say, though, I know an author who has used a mall as a setting, but the mall was infested with zombies. So
Well, there you have it. There you
so
have it. Yeah.
so it was pretty scary, and it was an abandoned mall too, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So you've got your abandoned building plus zombies.
Yeah. And you'd also have all of those mannequins left behind in the stores,
Mm.
these creepy things walking around. That'd be pretty fun.
Mm. So, trauma can also be used to create tension between characters. So, how would you approach handling that type of character interaction?
Okay. Again, I'm thinking of this book that just came out, it's really top of mind right now. And the two girls in this, they're two teenage girls, and they come from extremely different backgrounds. One comes from a home where the mother is an alcoholic and a sex worker, and her live-in boyfriend is a drug addict and has been abusing this little girl since she was like 6 or 7. The other one comes from a hardworking, middle class Canadian home. Both parents love her. She's a cheerleader. She's dating the captain of the hockey team. So they're really from different sides of the street, if you will, or the fence. But when they get into very bad situations, these girls who really don't even know each other and don't really even like each other at all, they have disdain for each other's differences, but they have to get along in order to survive. And so that tension between them, they're fighting adults who want to do them harm, they're fighting wild animals who want to do them harm or at least eat them. They're fighting the environment, they're fighting the law, and they're fighting their own fears, and they have to fight each other, but they have to get along in order simply to survive. So a lot of tension between characters that way.
Mm. Yeah, situational tension can be an interesting thing, all right. So, character development, especially secondary characters, can be enhanced by how they react and deal with trauma, either theirs or others. So, do you have any tips on writing that effectively and respectfully?
Mhm. Yeah, the role of the secondary character quite frequently is to support that primary character. And it's important that the secondary character does that support without taking over the story. You don't want someone who is so interesting or that has their own set of traumas that they begin to take over the story. I think one of the things that secondary characters can do, especially for readers, is give them a little pause, a little comfortable break, even perhaps a little humor right after a chaotic or extremely frightening situation. So respectfully, yeah, you want that secondary character to honor and support the primary character and not to try to overshadow them.
That's an interesting thought. I didn't think of that. The secondary characters are sort of the comfortable place where the readers can go after we've mangled the main character so much. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And oftentimes they're slightly amusing. They're kind of a comfortable place that we can
Yeah.
go. Mhm.
Yeah, that could explain why readers gravitate to secondary characters quite a bit as well. So, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, character trauma can also bring secrets into the plot, creating another form of tension. But that sort of plot point needs a certain type of balance. So, how would you handle writing a character with a secret trauma?
I think that takes us back to our earlier discussion about the unreliable narrator. The unreliable narrator has some deep secrets that he or she maybe doesn't even know, themselves. I mean, possibly. Um, Secret trauma will shape how our worldview will shape our worldview. We certainly can be traumatized as adults with PTSD from war or from relationships or from an accident, but much of our trauma starts when we're children. And I think that these characters with their secrets and their hidden traumas can be especially fun for the writer to develop this character, to pick out these little things and give, as I mentioned before, those little clues, those little Easter eggs to the reader. But yeah, I think the unreliable narrator hides those secrets. I mean, we all have secrets, right? Even normal folks that are not unreliable narrators have our little secrets. but I think this is a particularly fun character to develop.
So, how would you handle character reactions when the secret comes out? I'm not talking about the character with the secret, but the people who suddenly find out about the secret in the book. So, how would you handle their reactions? Do you think a variety of reactions is the most plausible way to go?
Um, well, I don't, I could tell you the ending of this current book, but I'm not going to. But that definitely is a reaction when one person finds another person's secret, and there is a pretty significant reaction. The book that I'm working on right now, there's a huge secret. I mean, there is just a huge secret between these two characters who are in fact married to each other, and one is going to find out that secret, and it's just going to blow the world apart. So how that's going to end, I don't know. They'll tell me, but yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. But I love that idea. You're like, you what? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I've watched a few true crime shows where secrets have exploded, usually violently, but
Mhm, mhm.
yeah, I can imagine. So another subset of characters, the morally gray characters or antiheroes, often have a foundation for their character of trauma, as do villains. So how do you balance their darker nature with with their experiences while not appearing to be exploiting the trauma for reader sympathy?
Crystal Lynn Harsh took revenge on her mother's abusive boyfriend's fingers with a pair of tree loppers. Majorca Fairhaven sent her cheating boyfriend's car into a lake. Two teenage girls, two violent turning points, one very bad week for the men in their lives. Then We'll Be Safe follows these two strangers as they flee the Royal Canadian Mounted Police through 1970s British Columbia, bonding over shared trauma, escalating crimes, predatory wildlife, and the psychological weight of their life choices. Set along the Highway of Tears, one of Canada's most dangerous and isolated stretches of road, this is a highly emotional psychological thriller about childhood pain, survival, and the lies we tell ourselves in our desperate need to be loved. Think Thelma and Louise, but Canadian.
So, readers and viewers of horror films, we have been in love with villains since the beginning, right? I mean, I'm sure that you have your own particular villain that you just kind of secretly love, right? We all
Oh,
have that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I love most of the villains.
we do. We really like them. And I think the thing that we try to do as readers and of course as writers is we look for that little seed of humanity that's inside of each of those villains. Now, we might be horrified and traumatized by what the villain does to the other characters in the story, but we deep down inside know that that villain is doing whatever he or she or it is doing because he or she or it feels that somewhere along the line this is the right thing to be doing. And we, as consumers of this story, of these stories, we're looking for that reason deep down inside, and we want to believe that there's no creature out there that's 100% horrible and evil. We want to believe there's some grain of humanity or kindness in there. I can still remember watching the movie when it first came out a billion years ago, Werewolves of London. And did you ever see that? It's
Uh,
it's great.
no, I haven't watched it, but I know of it. So yeah.
Okay, it's really old, but it was super great. And I actually saw it in London when it first came out. And there's a scene where the werewolf is the girl's boyfriend, and this boyfriend who they're very much in love, and he turns into the werewolf and he's about to attack his girlfriend. I mean, I saw this probably, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. I still remember this scene because here's the werewolf with these glowing eyes and this girl, and I don't remember the guy's name, but she says, "Johnny, is that you, Johnny?" And for just a second, the werewolf kind of goes, huh? And then of course he attacks her. But in that moment, I had that feeling. I said, oh, please, please let him see that this love is more important than, doing what werewolves do. And that is what I'm talking about here. It's like 20 years ago, I was, oh, please, villain, let your goodness come out. It still haunts me. Great film.
So, yeah, morally gray characters are a little more complex, I think, in some ways. Why do you think they appeal to readers?
Um, well, again, I think that sort of reflects our own issues, our own moral gray areas. We see that in the werewolf. We see that in the villain. Like, we are not going to go out and kill someone and cook them and eat them. We're not going to do that. But I know we might have had that idea along the way, somewhere along the line.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about the cooking and eating part, but yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone is just like, I wish that guy would drop dead.
Sure. And so we do see ourselves reflected in these characters. And again, I think we want the villains to be good somehow.
Okay, so psychological motivation, especially motivations derived from trauma, can differ between genders. So, how do you think gender-based trauma shapes darker impulses?
I'm so glad you brought this up. This is huge, and it's an area that is of great fascination to me. I'm doing a ton of research on it. I'm tackling it in with my YouTube channel, Her Poison Pen. And I find this absolutely fascinating. And yes, enormous difference between the way that the genders experience trauma, process trauma, and then carry the trauma with them down the line. And from my research, at this point anyway, what I'm really coming to understand is that men or males, they process their darker impulse very simply, I think. They're very simple and they're clear. It usually comes from a place of a desire for power or sex. And the desire for sex is often a desire for power, overpowering someone else. Whereas women, we come from a much more complicated place. It comes from psychological grief, psychological horror that we've carried for a long time, that we haven't been able to act on. It also comes from a deep sense of revenge. So I think men, they're pretty easy to understand in terms of their dark impulses, whereas women come from a place of deep rage, and that's much more complicated. I find this incredibly fascinating, and I'm digging into it with great joy.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of desire for control on both sides as well. It manifests itself differently. Like the men want to, I think, more control physically in a lot of ways, and they're very aggressive about it, where women have more of a psychological manipulative type of control.
Mhm,
When
mhm,
they go to the dark side, I've
mhm,
noticed that like I said, I watch a lot of true crime shows, and I've noticed that in the different psychologies of the crime, especially with serial killers or multiple murderers. Women's motivation a lot of times is motivated by money. They want the money to be able to do what they want, to have the freedom. And men, like you said, they're motivated by power and sex. So I think that's interesting.
mhm. Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. Women, they're just so much more complicated. It's like one thing to just be big and strong and hit somebody, and it's another thing to come up with this complex story that's going to ensnare someone, or get control in a much more subtle way. So it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I am seeing, possibly because I'm studying it, but I'm seeing more and more writers attacking this issue from the female gaze, which delights me.
Yeah, me too. There's a lot of talk, and there's even a subgenre now of horror called pink horror. Yeah, which delves into this specific women's issues and women's rage issues as well, which I had never heard of until I did another podcast where someone brought it up, and I did a little research on it, and yeah, it's an interesting little subgenre that's been developing recently. So, do you think writers pay enough attention to exploring the psychology of extended victims, families, children of both killers and the murdered victims and the aftermath of crime?
I don't think in that we pay enough attention to those family members and other people associated with victims of crime and trauma at all, in whether it's in our writing or it's in real life. And I can give, actually, I feel like I can give fiction writers a pass on this, because unless let's say the parents of a child who's been brutally murdered, unless that grief and that the emotions that those parents feel and the actions that they take, unless that moves the plot forward, you really don't have the luxury of staying with that for very long. But in real life, I think we pass by it way too quickly. And I'm thinking right now of recently the United States bombed a school, and over 170 people were killed, most of them young children, most of them girls. And that stayed in the news cycle just a couple of days. I mean, it comes up a little bit, but there's nothing about the parents. There's nothing about the family, nothing, right? And then I think about the families, the sisters and brothers, the siblings, and the parents of a young kid who commits a school murder, right? Who goes in and mows down 13 of his fellow students. Now, like, how do you get past Thanksgiving dinner? How do you get through Christmas when your brother has just killed 13 kids, or your son? How do the parents deal with that? It's very traumatic. And then just one more thing on my little soapbox here. What about the pets? I mean, what happens to that dog that sits looking at the door and the kid never comes home, or the family never comes home? What happens to the pets? Now I'm going to get off that soapbox because it gets me really going.
Yeah. Last episode on the podcast, we touched a little bit about that. And we were talking about I think it was the daughter of the BTK killer. And she's actually helping the police now with possible victims they haven't discovered of his yet. So that's one way she's processing her trauma. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, boy, it's horrible.
Yeah. So the popularity of horror subgenres has often shifted with changing society, and the psychology of motivations and tropes have shifted as well, such as, in the 70s and 80s, serial killers in suburbia sort of led the whole slasher movie craze. So how much of your inspiration is pulled from societal influences and the darker things that can come with these changes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Well, art imitates life, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I write about powerful women who are also deeply flawed, and they oftentimes are driven by their desire to gain agency in a male-dominated society. So I pull a lot from what's happening in society. The book that I just wrote was written in the 1970s, and the murder and rape of young women and girls on this highway in Canada, that was a powerful influence on this story. Also, the book that's coming out later this year is a modern day book, and it deals a lot with women's desire to be beautiful in order to have agency in this world, because that sometimes is the only thing that a woman has is her physical looks and the lengths that women go to just to gain that agency. So yeah, my work is influenced by society a lot, and the demands of society.
Yeah, the whole beauty image and body image thing, that's a whole issue in itself. We could probably do a podcast on that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Yeah, it's pretty, it's a form of violence, actually. The
Mm,
things that women will do to their bodies just to stay with someone or, get someone, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the body horror, like female-centric body horror comes from some of those issues and the society how society views women as well, so.
Exactly.
So, what are your thoughts on using supernatural monsters or creatures as a metaphor for trauma?
I think it's great. I think monsters and supernatural critters and so forth are great metaphors for who we are inside with what's going on with us. I haven't written any supernatural creatures, but it's certainly an intriguing idea, and I love to read about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's all I write basically, so
Mhm.
I love the supernatural stuff.
Mhm. So how do you when you're deciding to write something and you've got this creature, do you say, I want this to mirror this personality, or how do you go about that?
Well, it depends on the story and what purpose the monster is basically serving. I mean, they can be just an out and out villain, right? Uh, some like a supernatural, primal, natural force that's just doing what it does, right? And then you have the people trying to survive. It's doing what it does. Or you could have something like the one I'm writing now, where the supernatural force is basically a reflection of one part of female trauma. And then I have two other characters that are two other parts of female trauma. So that's more of the metaphors. Like it's a creature, it's basically a manifestation of female rage at this point.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's taking the female rage out not on the males, but on the women.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so there's a little twist there. So I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can do it, and then you can actually use like with one of the stories in fairy tale fairy tales and nightmares. I kind of took that sort of damsel in distress in the Sleeping Beauty story I retold, and sort of made the damsel in distress not so much in distress as you would think, and sort of made that a sort of reflection on the male gaze of that happens in fairy tales.
Huh, interesting.
Mm,
Fun. Those must be fun to write.
yeah, they are. So let's wrap up the episode with you telling us about your books and any upcoming projects.
Okay. As I said, just published, Crystal Lake published Then We'll Be Safe. Late this fall, I think November, I have a modern day book, the one I mentioned, set in Thailand, and it's called Such Lovely Skin. It's particularly gruesome and deals with how we think of women and how we think of beauty and all of that. And then I'm writing a book right now set in the 1980s in Seattle about an extremely quirky serial killer. And, she does horrible things, but in kind of a funny way. So I find myself as I'm writing horrible things and I'm laughing as I'm typing. So I don't know how that's going to work out. Also, I have my uh, YouTube channel, Her Poison Pen. So I have episodes twice a month with that and interview very powerful female writers, yourself included, on that podcast. And I'm part of a group with Crystal Lake's 2026 author's journey, and these folks are going to keep me on my toes. I'm well aware of that already. We just started, but they're into it. They're going for it. So no slacking on this side. So actually, I'm pretty busy, really
Mm.
pretty busy.
Yeah, I'm providing a little feedback on the back end of that on the author's journey myself. So good luck to all of them. So yeah, because I mean, so far the stories have been interesting, if needing somewhat a little bit of work. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, they're all everybody's at sort of the first draft
yeah, stage. Yeah,
so we expect to see growth and
yeah,
progress.
yeah. But the stories have got a lot of potential. So I'm hoping they get some help and improve their writing and go on to get published. So
Yay.
good luck to all of them. And good luck to you too. So, and we'll wrap the episode up here. And I'd like to thank you for being a guest. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
It's always a pleasure.
Okay. And that's it for now. And bye, everybody.